Welcome back to the history and evolution of the MMORPG genre. This is Part 3, the genre post-World of Warcraft, Section 1, Lord of the Rings Online. After World of Warcraft had taken the video game world by storm, other developers tried to replicate that success. Nowadays, it feels like every MMO game released after WoW is a WoW clone. But that is a bit unfair. Most of these games used a similar skill system, quest system, and included dungeons and raids because WoW had shown the blueprint for a system that worked. What really was happening were the developers learning how to use a proven strategy and then adding their own flair on top of it. In this video, we will be looking at a game that falls neatly into this description in Lord of the Rings Online. And in the next section, we will look at one that tried to take the formula and do something new in the secret world. This is the third part of my exploration of the MMORPG genre's history, looking at what makes an MMORPG, and what each addition to this genre of video games takes from its predecessors, and what ideas it explores to make it unique. The Lord of the Rings Online was released by Turbine Incorporated on April 24th, 2007, a few years after WoW debuted. My first impression was that it was WoW with a Lord of the Rings skin. For the most part, this is the case. It doesn't hide that similarity because it's focusing on just being Middle-earth. As I'm playing it now, the game is actually being run by a different company called Standing Stone Games, and the game has seen 6 expansions over its lifetime, with the 7th coming in 2021. The story covers the entirety of the Ring War, with the latest content looking at what the effect of Sauron's demise had on Middle-earth. Lotro, as it's called online, is a standard MMORPG with a Lord of the Rings skin. But does it add anything to the genre? First, let's look at what it has according to the Thebq System. I created this system as my way of seeing if an MMORPG has everything that an MMORPG needs as established by its predecessors. The Thebq System covers all of these sections as listed on screen right now, and I'll take a moment so that we can re-familiarize ourselves with the system. Alright, now let's jump into Lotro, Lord of the Rings Online. Starting with character. Originally, the game only had 4 races and 7 classes, with only 2 races being added since. These races are only ones that would be found in the Lord of the Rings books. No pandas or werewolves like in WoW. The player is never a member of the Fellowship of the Ring, but their missions do affect and help the Fellowship, allowing the player to feel like they are helping the heroes of the story without changing too much of Tolkien's story. Moving on to economy, the player economy is almost identical to WoW's. Players can collect or make items that they can then put on the auction house to sell to other players. Crafting is also a feature, but again, it's almost the exact same as WoW. Moving on to dungeons, Lotro has public dungeons that can be entered from the overworld at any time with any number of players. You can see the entrance to one on screen now. There are also epic battles and raids that have a large number of players in a large instance fighting together. All of these aren't as scripted as WoW's were, but still large and epic. On to bosses. Much like WoW, Lotro has named monsters and enemies. However, they are really only stronger and have larger health pools rather than having multiple mechanics to test players in the fight. As for competition, PvP, or player versus player, in the game is only found in duels. There are no large-scale PvP instances in the game. Instead, there is a unique mode called PvMP, or Player versus Monster Player. This means that players can choose to create a monster to play as. These monsters are usually the enemies found in the Lord of the Rings series. It could be an orc, spider, warg, or even an urukai. After the player creates their monster character, they could choose to play in a specific area and fight other normal players. And again, this is something wholly unique to this game. Moving on to the endgame section. Although the game does have raids, most of the players spend the endgame exploring Middle-earth and improving either their character or crafting things for their own personal house. As for the world, for the most part, the overworld of Middle-earth is entirely persistent, meaning that it is completely loaded at all times. And although a player could choose to go from one end of the continent to the other, it would take around 3 hours in real time. The only instances are for public dungeons and raids, and also interiors, which are usually areas that are either inside buildings or are a small area where story and cutscenes take place.
And now is the time when I talk about the user interface and how the game feels to play. And I'm actually going to start off with combat on this one, because at least with how this class works, it has a very interesting thing where I'll use a skill like that, and it will cause more skills to activate, or as they're called in this game, proc, or most MMOs is called proc. I don't know if that's how it is for other classes, but I thought it was interesting with that one, seeing as it actually tells you on the screen how or which skill you're supposed to use next. It takes a little bit of the learning out of it and kind of hold your hand. Now that I'm heading back to stat, I'll also talk about movement. Just like in the other MMOs we've played, you use the W, A, S, D keys to move around, and the Q and E cause you to strafe. You can control the camera in two ways, one with your right-click mouse button. This also controls the direction your character is heading in. The other is if you click down the left mouse button, which allows you to turn the camera around without your character turning. And last but not least, like the other games we played, if you hold down both mouse buttons at the same time, your character automatically moves forward, and you can move the camera. Now we'll move on to the map. Like the other games we played, it has a mini-map on the right side, and like World of Warcraft and EverQuest 2, if you hover your mouse over the icons on that mini-map, it'll tell you in extremely small print what you're looking at. Unlike the other maps that we've looked at, this is what the big map looks like. It's far more stylized than the WoW one was. The WoW was just trying to look like a real map with having useful information on it. This, outside of having your red arrow here, is very stylized, and when you're looking for quests, sometimes you'll have these red blobs down here, but a lot of times it'll just be the ring that you can barely see on the map, and it's very hard to see. You also can't zoom in on every single city you're in. I'm down here in the city of Stattle, or the village of Stattle, but I can't click on it to see a more in-depth map. I can on the bigger cities like Bree. It shows me a very in-depth map with all the roads and where the houses are and all of these icons, but not for Stattle, which is where the quest has taken me. So as far as I am concerned, I think the map in this game is the second worst I've played. Going back to skills, we still have the action bar at the bottom of the screen here, and it still allows you to either press number keys or click it with your mouse. I pretty much just click with my mouse because of the whole procking aspect. It's a lot easier than trying to hit the right mouse button or the right number key and maybe hitting the wrong thing and causing something else to happen than to just go down and click it manually. Items are handled almost identically to how World of Warcraft and EverQuest 2 handled it, where you have these bags that you can bring up with a click of the keyboard. You collect more bags just like in World of Warcraft. However, the main bag is a lot smaller than that one was, or at least has a few less rows. And you don't collect extra bags as quickly as you do in World of Warcraft. So I find myself running back and forth to merchants to sell off my junk more often than I did in WoW, which can be a little annoying. Also, because of how long the game has been out, it gives new players these gift boxes that give them buffs to like their health or their damage, or even giving them more XP when they play. But for me, they end up just jamming up my item space because I don't want to sell them, or I can't sell them, but I also don't need to use them. So that's a little bit annoying. This game does use the big 3 class system, with having DPS and tanks and healers fulfilling their normal roles. I'm actually playing a tank class in this one. That's why my character has a large shield, a big axe, and a bunch of heavy armor. Finally, let's see what happens when we talk to a quest giver. It's rather uninspired. A blue box, and then it allows you, and it just gives you all this. It's a lot bigger than World of Warcraft's was, but it's not really any more special than World of Warcraft's was. Either way, I'm a little disappointed with how the quest giving works in this. There's no thought bubbles, and while some NPCs will talk and you'll get into areas where you have a real world cutscene going on, meaning that while you're just playing and moving around, stuff like that happens where a character will start talking, or a cutscene and other NPCs will start interacting with each other, and you might miss it because you're facing the wrong way. It does add to the immersion, which I think is something that this game tries to go for a lot, is really getting you immersed into the world of Middle Earth. But from the MMO standpoint, it's a little bit annoying because you can miss things or not see where NPCs are going or saying. I don't believe that what they're saying doesn't appear in the quest box either, or the chat box either, so you can't go back and look for it.
So, while the game feels fine and is a pleasure to explore, there is a rather big issue to address for new players. Like most of the games in this project, I have played it for free, and you can play pretty much all of Lotro for free. However, it takes a lot of grinding to play all that way to level cap, and you can bypass this by spending real money. As of right now, a player either has to use in-game currency to pay for each expansion or buy them with actual cash. Like we heard about WoW in the last video, if someone buys the latest expansion, it includes every other expansion in that purchase. That isn't the case with Lotro. Every expansion has to be bought individually, and, at least for the latest expansion, a monthly sub is required. It's a huge point against the game. On the other hand, Lord of the Rings Online is the best way for people to truly experience Middle-earth and the stories of Tolkien. I think it's best put in this quote from a fanbyte.com article that reads, "That appeal of being in Middle-earth is both obvious and understated. Lord of the Rings Online has run long enough to have covered the entire War of the Ring and begun carefully mining the lesser explored appendices and supplements for material. It has grown geographically large enough to make a scenic horse ride from one end of the map to the other take about 3 hours. Tolkien's world is famous, but it's easy to forget how much that scope means to some people given the modern glut of entertainment options. WoW has its social and cosmetic side, but Middle-earth is Middle-earth." As for the question of what it added to the genre, players can have their own house to decorate however they wish, and the amount of options that a player has because of things they can collect or make for their house is something that was missing from WoW that players really wanted. And this system, while not the first, is something that may have influenced games like Final Fantasy XIV and Elder Scrolls Online that would come later. That's going to bring an end to this section covering Lord of the Rings Online. In the next section, we'll be looking at a wholly different kind of MMORPG, the Secret World. Thank you for watching this. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.